speaker and our commentator. The speaker obviously doesn't really need a whole lot of introduction. You all know him, Dr. Dowell Myers, a distinguished colleague from the School of Policy Planning and Development. He's really quite engaged in various research projects at the university, very well known at the university level as well as outside the university and internationally. He's a recipient of the American Sociological Review Award, the book award, which was given to him based on his previous, the last book he did, Immigrants and there's many others that are actually all of that. You have a long list to read outside. But I just simply wanted to think about how to sort of capture, because I know him so well, now we're obviously toward each other. How does one sort of capture the essence of Dowell Myers? And I think, other than his harmonica and and other things. But really sort of, I just struck it out. There's really two things. One, what it says here, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it really has to do with people and time. Right? Look at the work, it has to do with population growth, population dynamics, population change, population composition, changes in population composition, the cohorts, middle age, and what all it means for planning and public policy, both at the local level as well as the state and national level. So he really, one of the few scholars who bring demographic aspects of background of planning and public policy. So that's one. And the second one related to that is the notion of future. We always get him because we always know what one of the themes he's going to talk about. But it is very important, and planning is really about the future, and increasingly, in fact, we used to think of the long-term 20, 30 year future, but increasingly you have become more kind of a short-sighted, near-sighted. We don't really talk much about the future, but I think Professor Myers is the sort of the conscience of planning to remind us that we must think about the long-term future. So his work in the population growth dynamics and the Center for Integration, which is a disciplinary center at the university, are all very much involved with that. So I just sort of stop there, and then I have to come as the norm about 35, 40 minutes talk, and in this instance he has his doctoral student here, Jenna Goldberg. I didn't see her, but I saw Sarah Maherter, Sarah, over there, and Sung Hee Min. Is he here?
He's writing his dissertation. Due tomorrow.
Okay, and finally our commentator is Robert Simons, who is the, I'm going to read here, Rupert, who is the Assistant General Manager for the City of Los Angeles Community Development Department, otherwise known as CPD, more commonly. And he's responsible for the city's workforce and economic development division. He oversees the workforce development system and is responsible for the department's economic development initiative. Previously, he was the executive director of CPD's Los Angeles Youth Opportunity Movement, which provides educational, vocational, and career opportunities for young people ages 14 to 21 in the economically disadvantaged areas of Los Angeles. But as I was talking to him, I also realized that he happens to be a rather distinguished alum. He did his doctoral work in public administration, in the leadership of Professor Fisher. So with that, I'm going to let Professor Myers.
Thank you, Trudeau. Thank you. Well, thank you, everybody. Yeah, I think my voice is back. I just got it back just in time from a cold I had. I knew I was going to get sick, so I hurried up and got sick last week. So I'd be okay for Tuesday, today, being how important this is. planning is really all about making decisions that are going to go into the future, and yet all of our ideas and attitudes are about the past. And what we're going to talk about today is not so much future as it is present. We don't even know what the heck is going on today. We still think it's 1990, as I will show you in this talk here, which is co-written with Jana Goldberg, Sarah Mahorter, and Sung-Hee Min. We worked on this together starting last spring and produced it this summer. Then they made us embargo it until November. Meanwhile, new data came out. It was quite agonizing, having a report that you're sitting on and new data is coming out. So we snuck some of that back in here. Well, I'm trying to advance it. I'll just do it manually here. So Los Angeles is the leader in immigration in many different ways, and people don't fully realize it's the leader on the upswing and also a leader on the downswing, and it's the leader in the new maturity. I gotta say, advertising this talk trip across the country, I've gotten inquiries from Washington, D.C. and from Cambridge, Massachusetts, and people are telling me how Los Angeles, they noticed, California came out differently in the polls. California was more mature about immigration than other parts of the country. Well, we've been there, we've done that. We're ahead of the curve, and the rest of the country needs to follow us. So we thought for this particular project, we would compare LA and New York, which we don't usually do. And it's interesting. This is the number of newcomers in the last decade. Prior to 1970, there was about 500,000, 500,000 new immigrants living in New York City. And then by 1990, that had nearly doubled to 1 million newcomers had arrived in the last decade before 1990. And then more recently, that's kind of dropped off a little bit. So New York is the gold standard for immigration because it was the home of immigration early in the 20th century. The great waves before World War I were centered on New York City. LA hardly existed then. But in the latter part of the 20th century, LA was the big destination. So New York's number of newcomers rose 100% over this period. Well, here's what happened in Los Angeles. Now, what we're comparing here is LA County and New York City because they're roughly the same size. New York has roughly 8 million people in the city. LA has 3.5 million in the city. So if we're going to compare absolute sizes, LA's too small. So we're looking at LA County, which is closer to 9.5 million. It's really more similar to New York City's size. And the point you see here is that where we had fewer newcomers in LA in the 70s, by 1990, it had skyrocketed upward, an increase of 357% in the number of newcomers, just a huge surge in immigration that was focused on LA and Southern California. After that point, it dropped off dramatically in Los Angeles, falling by nearly half since 1990 in the number of newcomers. So this is a very extreme turnaround, whereas New York's been more constant over the decades, and many people's attitudes about immigration in California are based on this upswing. They assume there's this acceleration, and that's continuing, they sort of assume, where in fact it's gone the opposite direction. So that's newcomers, and here's the total percent foreign-born of the population. And here we're comparing LA City, County, New York City, United States, all in 1970. And you see that New York was ahead of us in the percentage of its population that was foreign-born or immigrant back then. But by 1990, Los Angeles had surged ahead of New York. And meanwhile, more recently, we're still ahead of New York, but you see that the growth in foreign-born since 1990 has really gone flat. The big surge was from 1970 to 1990. And I should point out that that was also the period that set up the support for Prop 187, which was voted on in 1994 after immigration had actually subsided already because of the recession, but people were still acting like it was 1990. And in case they didn't know that, all the campaign rhetoric for Prop 187 told them that we were at record levels and it was going through the ceiling. So even if it was a false story, that's what people voted on. Well, that, I'll show you, come back to it later, that has now ended. It's leveled off. And we've entered a new period that we haven't taken advantage of yet. We haven't recognized this, that there's now many more settled immigrants, and they have these helping hands who can benefit the newcomer immigrants. Here's for LA City. This is the total population, the percent foreign-born, and we did it in layers. So it's the portion of the foreign-born that arrived in the last 4 years, the portion that arrived in the last 5 to 9 years, and then 10 to 19, and then people who've been here for more than 20 years. We call the long-time immigrants, the settled immigrants, those who've been here for more than 20 years. And so you see how it stacks up. Well, back in the good old days of 1990, back here, an extremely large portion of all of the immigrants were pretty much newcomers in Los Angeles. But those have really dropped off now, and the big growth is all up here in these long settled immigrants. And this is an enormous resource of advantage to the city. It's not recognized generally. We think just all immigrants are kind of alike. And we call this the helping hands phenomena. And we compute this as a ratio of the long settled divided by the new immigrants. And here's what it looked like in the United States. There was basically roughly one old-timer for every newcomer in the US, and recently that's increased to maybe 2 old-timers for every newcomer. In California, it's a little more extreme, and in Los Angeles, it's still more extreme. So we actually had half an old-timer to help every newcomer. And now we have 3 times as many, or 4 times as many, or was that actually 8 times? This is 4, and that's half. It's 8 times as many old-timers helping hands to support newcomers. So this is a big advantage. If you were a newcomer showing up in 1990, you'd be surrounded by other new immigrants. You're swimming in immigrants, newcomers just like you. Nobody knows the ropes. Now you show up, and you can find help with getting a job, getting housing, all kinds of assistance. There's all kinds of institutions that have been put in place to help your country folk, people from your homeland. Now, this is for everybody combined, but we actually broke it out by every single ethnic group. Well, not all of them, but how many do you want to see? Let's just see what we have here for LA County. Here's Taiwanese. It used to be there was no old-timers to help. Now there's a ton of old-timers. Salvadorans, Vietnamese, Mexicans, Iranians. What else do we have? Koreans, Chinese, and Guatemala. And so these here have the lowest increase. So they went from 0 to 2. That's a pretty good increase. But Vietnamese is more extreme. So for whatever ethnic group you want to look at, we find the same phenomena. There are many more old-timers who are available with helping hands for newcomers. It's a big bonus to be a newcomer immigrant in LA today compared to what it was back in 1990. Here they are, just all compiled together. We put this on the flyer for our, the picture of the brochure. All right, so that's our background here, that LA has really been the leader in immigration. It experienced the big surge in immigration. It's leveled off now. It's ahead of New York. We have these helping hands. We haven't figured out what to do with them exactly. But now people can't see that reality because they're blinded by these myths about immigration. And we're just going to highlight 5 of them. This is a significant message. I've been taking it across the country. I was in Salt Lake City. I was at the Mormon temple. I gave the message there, and they all seem to believe it. So maybe it'll work here. So immigrants are accelerating out of control. They're all newcomers. They're like Peter Pan, as a phrase coined in my book, meaning that they never change over time. They never get older, never adjust economically. They stay exactly like newcomers their whole lives. And they are basically all foreigners, and so are their children. And finally, of course, they're a burden, and we don't need them. Now, this is a myth that it prevails across the country. I'm not sure it prevails in California, although many Californians still talk this way. I heard this during the campaign for governor and for senator. I heard this rhetoric that was talking about this, like this myth still lives in some quarters in California. So we're going to come back and we're going to assess each of these points and see what's the story. So is immigration accelerating out of control? Here's actual data for all these different traditional gateways. New York, it did accelerate. It peaked in 2000 and there's fewer newcomers than there were back in 2000. California peaked in 1990 because of our recession and is now down to here. LA County is actually below the level it was in 1980. It's really back in the 1970s now for the flow of newcomers. It's really slowed down. Florida, where I'm from, went through the ceiling still, which I didn't make sense to me because I'm from Miami. So then I found the data for Miami. I gave a talk there a while back. I had to get the Miami data. And sure enough, it peaked also in Miami and has slowed down there. So this is all North Florida, which is acting more like Georgia and North Carolina, which I'll show you next. Because these places, at a much higher scale of 800% increase, they had virtually no immigrants back here until after 1990. Now, those of you who heard me talk before know my sermon on this. Why does Georgia and North Carolina have immigration all of a sudden? It's because of California. California slowed down because of our recession, and all the would-be immigrants who would have loved to live in Los Angeles, they went elsewhere. And they discovered good jobs and cheaper housing, all these other places across America. And that's why there's an explosion right here. But they've leveled off also. Arizona's still sloping upward a little bit. And Arizona has been the center of resistance to immigration because it's still increasing more than it was, but way above the US level. So there are some differences around the country, and California's population is maturing more rapidly than the rest of the country. So accelerating out of control, well, here's the percent foreign-born, and what most people do through 2000 is unavoidably we all extrapolate. We take the past and whatever the trend is and we just continue it. It seems to be built into our DNA. You can't help it. You just extrapolate and then you react. When you listen to people's rhetoric, they always talk about the way things are going, we're going to end up here. That's what they say. And they make all their arguments based on where we're going to be. Well, they're imagining that, or maybe imagining that, but in reality, we think it's going like this, that we've pretty much maxed out at 26 to 28%, right in that range there, and the percent foreign-born is at a steady state. It's not going through the ceiling. And once it's not going through the ceiling, that means whatever it is, it's much more manageable. What's to be afraid of? This is reality, and we can live with this, and we can take advantage of it. Especially if you recognize that the key here is how many people are long settled, because they're the ones that really bring the big advantages, and there's more of them than there used to be. So that's our projections, and we're going to be doing more on projections this winter. You'll hear about it once we get past January. We have a revision coming of our California projections. But do you want to see current reality? Here's the current reality, what we know today of immigration and foreign-born. And here's the U.S. The U.S. has started to go flat, has leveled off, and this is a bit of a projection to right here. But California has leveled off, and here's all the different counties. Sure, Los Angeles has more, higher percent, but it's gone slightly downward from its peak. So we think it's already leveled off, and we don't think it's going to revive. Housing prices are still a whole lot cheaper everywhere else. And if you're an immigrant who has all these other destinations you could go to with friends and contacts who are telling you, come to Omaha, I can get you an apartment for $200. And your friends in LA say, I can get you a deal for $1,200. Where would you go? You know, you might go to Omaha. Second big myth, are all immigrants newcomers? Well, I've already showed you this. They're not all newcomers. These are newcomers. Who are these people? There's tons of these people used to be newcomers, but now, you know, if you do the arithmetic, I always make jokes that demographers are smarter than economists. Economists can't predict interest rates 3 months ahead. Otherwise, we would have refied our mortgages at different times than we have. But demographers know that in 10 years' time, everybody will be 10 years older. Or if you're an immigrant, you would have lived here 10 years longer. And so it's predictable what does happen. But with Peter Pan, you sort of live in the mythology that it's not so. And here's for all this, states in the nation, and we built the total percent foreign-born out of old-timers on the bottom and newcomers on top. So the top segment here, people who arrived after 2000. The next segment down is 1990s, 1980s, and these are people who arrived before 1980. So you see California here has the highest percent foreign-born, with newcomers still coming, but a whole heck of a lot of long-settled immigrants. Whereas in these new destination states here, the newcomers really are very dominant as a share of the total, aren't they? And so you can see how their whole attitude about immigrants is that immigrants are like newcomers because that's all they ever see. That's all they know about. Where it's very different in California or Illinois or New York or some other states. So are immigrants like Peter Pan? This is a graph borrowed from a different report that we put out in September to the Center for American Progress. It was called Assimilation Today. And we looked at immigrants in 1990 and then again in 2000 and then one more time in 2008 and measured their progress the longer they stayed in America. And what do you see, of course? On some variables, there's huge progress. Moving towards a better income or moving towards home ownership or moving towards citizenship is dramatic increases. On other variables, there's very little progress. It turns out that education is one dimension that immigrants do not make progress on. If you arrive at age 25, you generally do not go back to school. You're here to work. That's why immigrants come. They're here to work. They're supporting a family. And they haven't got time to go back to school. Their kids, however, go way above these levels because their kids are here in school, and it's a different story for them. So you could tell a negative story based on this or a positive story based on that. I won't answer the question, but you can just guess which one immigrant restriction is focused on. They focus on education. They don't focus on home ownership. They avoid that like the plague because that's the wrong story. It's a remarkable story of the American dream being achieved. So the immigrants do not stay like Peter Pan. They actually do change dramatically over time. Across the country, people don't know this because they have so little exposure to immigrants. All they have is rhetoric they hear about, and they are the most susceptible to the myths that I'm laying out here. So to make this point, I want to compare just a few states that are noteworthy. South Carolina is my favorite state. I did a project on South Carolina, a paper I did not get a very good grade back when I was in high school about John C. Calhoun. South Carolina is really the capital of the Confederacy. But more recently, why is South Carolina famous? It's the home of You Lie. You don't know You Lie? Congressman who shouted out against Obama. Georgia is the economic heart of the South, with Atlanta being the airport hub. Utah is where I visited most recently, and Arizona, the two major states in the West. Texas is here, and then California. But the important thing is, in these two states, there's a high percentage who are long settled and a low percentage who recently arrived. This is of Mexican immigrants. Very low percent recently arrived among those people. The rest of the Mexicans are Mexican Americans now. They've been here a long time. Whereas in South Carolina, what do you see? Over half of all the Latino immigrants have been here just since 2000. And so they have a very different view of what the future holds, because all they see is there's more and more immigrants. There are more and more of them speaking Spanish. And by God, there's just more of them, and they're stacking up, and there's these newcomers, and they don't assimilate. Well, there's no way they can know they don't assimilate because they haven't been there long enough. But that's the image they have. We don't feel that that's true in California, and I'll show you why. I'm going to take the homeownership variable. This is for Latino immigrants, and this is the percent who are homeowners here, and this is the percent who are long settled immigrants. And basically, the longer people are, more of your people who are settled, the higher your percentage of your people who are homeowners. Here's South Carolina down here. Low homeownership and low percent who are long settled. It doesn't matter that South Carolina's housing prices are a lot lower. It doesn't matter. People are so new there, they haven't had time to buy a house. But you see how the line is pretty progressive as you go up this. Now, California doesn't have as high home ownership because it does have a lot higher housing prices. There's a bit of a problem here, but even in California, we have this exceptional rate of home ownership among Latino immigrants that I think it's astounding that they're that successful. Are the children of immigrants foreigners? Well, you wouldn't think you'd have to ask this question, but you sure hear a lot about it politically. There's some people who really try to make this point stick. By all the implications are that immigrant children don't really belong here because they're foreigners. And, well, let's find out. So here we have data for LA City. This is what's most important to us. And we're going to do it 3 different ways. First, look at where kids based on where their parents came from. And then look at the children, where they were born. And then we'll do it by generation. So 3 different slices of this picture. So here's the parents. And the parents, in LA, barely a third are native-born parents. Now, the mixed category here is kids who have one immigrant parent and one native-born parent. And so we have big debates over how to classify these. Should they be counted as kids with native-born, or should they be counted as kids with foreign-born? My research partner, John Pitkin, is right in the middle of this because his wife is Finnish. His kids are now like 35 years old, and but are they immigrant kids or are they not immigrant kids? I mean, he's not immigrant, so there's a category in the middle here. And then these are kids who have all foreign-born parents. So that's where the parents come from. But what about the kids? The kids, 92% in Los Angeles, 92% are native-born. They're US-born. And there's only a tiny little fraction up here, and these are mostly teenagers who are foreign-born. And then by generation, the foreign-born are we call first generation, and then the second generation have immigrant parents, but they're born here themselves. And the third generation are people who were born here and their parents were born here too. So that's how it breaks out by generation. So yeah, the parents are foreign-born. No, the kids are not foreign-born. Now, so last spring we did a study that kind of elaborates on this in an interesting way. I used to live in Texas, and I learned that in Texas there's only 2 kinds of people. There's Texans and there's non-Texans. If you're a Yankee, you might as well be an immigrant. And so I thought, well, we could do the same thing in California. You have people who are homegrown, born in California, and then there's everybody else. It doesn't matter if you're from Iowa or if you're from Mexico. You're all the same. You're from out of state. If you're in-staters, that means that you grew up here your whole life and you went through the schools your whole life, and that's a very different picture. So I'm going to show you now, I'm going to show you a profile that we developed for LA City that breaks this out by place of birth, foreign-born, California-born, and other people who are other US-born. And here it is for the white non-Hispanic population. This is by age. And so among the oldest people, there's very few who are born in California. Most of them migrated here from Iowa or Oklahoma. And there's some foreign-born, like 20% foreign-born, from Canada, these are all white, so they could be from different locations in Europe, Italy. And then among the kids, they're almost all California-born. They're not born in other states. They're not born in other countries. So let's look at the other races here. Here's Latino. Latino, very few are born in other states. Either you're born abroad or you're born in California. And again, a steep increase among kids. This is the new generation born in California. Among African Americans, we have the highest percent. Highest percent who are what? The highest percent who are actually California born, homegrown. Right through here, up to age 49. It's enormously high percent. These are the people who are the true Californians, you could say. Everybody else here came from some other state. They're just Iowans posing as Californians. So here's the true Californians. And relatively few foreign-born African Americans. There's more on the East Coast than there are in California. And then finally we come to Asians. Every one of these groups has a different profile. Heavily foreign-born among the adults. And yet, again, among the kids, there is this dramatic increase in the number who are homegrown, native Californians. So this has been adopted, this homegrown thesis has been adopted by some political scholars, Joe Matthews and Mark Paul, in their new book, California Crack-Up, make this homegrown revolution a foundation for their arguments about the new mindset about who are the Californians and what does it mean for our responsibility for raising the next generation. Because so often in the past, Californians have looked at newcomers as migrants from somewhere else to be beat away with a stick. We don't need any more migrants. But when people are born here and grow up here, it's a different game. And this kind of picture is a way of making people realize that most of these different groups who are young are really our kids. They're kids that grew up here, and they're kids that we should be responsible for. Are the kids, here, let me skip ahead forward one more graph. Which states are most attractive at holding on to their homegrown? It turns out California is in the top 10. In fact, it's in the top 5. There's 66% of all the people born in California and live somewhere in the US still live in California. The highest percent is Texas. 75% of Texans are still in Texas. Now, my son Ben was born in Texas. He lives in California, so take one for us. And my other son, Jesse, he was born here. He's living in Texas now. Take one for them. There's some swapping going on. Obviously, over time, people do move away gradually for different reasons. They go off to college. God forbid they marry some girl who's from Texas, and then they stay there. So there's a little bit of leakage in every state. But we do pretty good at holding on to our own. And it's important because these are kids we raise in our schools. These are our homegrown investments, and we want to keep them here to get the payback. I won't show you the bottom 10. The bottom 10 is like 25% stay in the state, like Nevada. You grew up in Nevada and stay in Nevada, only 25% or so. Okay, so now when people are here longer, I should point out also about the kids, is that initially people are speaking, this is for Latinos, and these are foreign-born, so Latino immigrants, and most of them are Spanish dominant, some are bilingual, only a little tiny bit are English dominant in the first generation. But in the second generation, those kids who've grown up here, you see that the Spanish dominant has really retreated to a small sliver of what it was once before. The bilingual is still substantial, it's maybe half of all the Latinos, but another large group is totally English dominant. These are data from the Pew Hispanic Center from a survey they did in 2002. And by the third generation, it's pretty much English all the way. So we come to the fifth myth. Are immigrants needed? And here I take the data from the PPIC, Public Policy Institute of California, and this is based on what white voters say. Are immigrants needed? And I took the creative liberty of classifying this separately by liberals and conservatives. In a survey, they asked people to declare themselves, their political leaning. So among liberals, 40% in 1998 said that immigrants are a burden. Conservatives, 54% said immigrants are a burden. And there is a gap here. So I know you want to see 2004. It's been the same ever since basically 2004. There was a radical shift that occurred. The liberals lightened up. Only 29% said that immigrants are a burden. 64% of conservatives, however, made that claim. And these people went opposite directions. And so now the gap has really widened to 35%. And so you might wonder, how is it possible that liberals could go one direction and conservatives the other direction? It's like they're watching different TV shows, or they're reading different newspapers. They're obviously not reaching the same conclusions. The good news, I think, is that anything that happens so quickly like this kind of polarization, which we all fear in America. It happened that quickly. Anything that quick can be undone, I think. If this had been a 30-year pattern, that's pretty entrenched. That'd be a hard one to undo. But I find some hope in these data that, that either the liberals or the conservatives will come around. And I'm going to bet it's the conservatives. After all, even conservatives have housekeepers. I've never had the opportunity to use that line before. You must take advantage of your opportunities. Okay, so what about the helping hands for our aging population? We had this growing senior ratio, which I think defines all the problems in America. It's the one that Obama needs to be showing to the people. Here's in the US, the ratio of people 65 and older divided by all people who are working age, and I'm going to count working age as 25 to 64. I mentioned my 2 kids. They're still not working age. So by 25, hopefully they'll all be working. And that ratio has been constant for the last 4 decades, or 5 decades, really. And anything that's constant that long is totally taken for granted. It's invisible. Nobody can see it. Nobody can feel it. We just assume there's order in the world, and this is how the world works. But being a demographer and predicting the future, I know that the baby boomers are getting older. I've heard it said they get older 1 year at a time, and that the first baby boomer will cross age 65 next year. In case you're keeping track of this, you want to know who our oldest baby boomers are. We have 1 leader on the Republican side and 1 leader on the Democratic side. Our Republican leader is George W. Bush, born in 1946. Our Democratic leader is Bill Clinton, born in 1946. Those 2 men, moving forward, they define the front edge of the baby boomers. And they reach 65. You'll hear all about it in the press next year. Well, when that happens, there's a flood that goes across that line behind them. And this is what happens to the senior ratio. Well, here's California. It's lower. It's parallel, right? In California, LA County is even lower. Here's what happens over the next 20 years and beyond. It's really a problem. The senior ratio skyrockets by some big number. What is the number? 80% in LA County between 2010 and 2030. 100% if you start back in 2000. So whatever his seniors do compared to working age is way out of whack. Whatever it is they do. Just think of the things that seniors do. They retire from jobs, okay. They want health care, okay. They want Social Security, check. Drive slow on the road, not okay. Sell their houses. And who do they sell houses to? Younger people. What about that ratio? Not okay. It's out of whack. A lot of things are bad. And this is the facts of life. This is not politics. This is not preferences. This is not even economics. This is demography. This is the chart that Barack Obama needs to show to the American people. And he would show it if it wasn't for Ross Perot. And Ross Perot already had a chart. And he already pointed to it. And he made big sucking sounds. And because he did it, and Obama doesn't want to be too professorial, he can't show a chart. So let me show it. Here's the chart. This describes all of our fiscal problems. That's where the deficit comes from. It's entitlements for the seniors, which they deserve. There's just too many of them. So in that context, what about those immigrants? It's not about do you like them or don't like them. It's what about the senior ratio and who's going to take those, fill those jobs and who's going to buy those houses? And so there's a dislike narrative which says basically you can't reverse aging and immigrants get older too and I don't like immigrants anyway and I can't afford them today. Well, that's the dislike narrative that's being promulgated in some quarters. I think a more productive political narrative is about our needs. Let's talk about our needs first. And by the way, immigrant advocates don't like this story. They don't not like to talk about do we need immigrants. They think immigrants should be treasured and valued for their own rights, on their own grounds, because they're people who deserve respect for themselves. And that's true, but it's not a winning political strategy. I think there's nothing to be lost by saying, do we need them? Because if you look at the senior ratio, by God, do we need them? Then a game over. There's no discussion. And so it turns out that the next 20 years are really critical. Immigrants don't get older right away, and they'll be young workers for the next 40 years. We need help the next 20 years desperately. And I do the calculations using Pew Hispanic data. It's going to reduce the number of immigrants we have today, the flow of immigrants compared to zero immigration is a huge benefit. And this actually reduces the senior ratio by 29% in the next 20 years. And over 40 years, it can reduce the senior ratio by 47%. That is a huge plus. A huge plus. So why are we arguing about it exactly? People are still stuck up here on dislike, and they're operating with those 5 myths. Take the 5 myths away, look at the senior ratio, I think it turns the tables. In Los Angeles, we're ahead of the curve. We've been there, we've done that. We had our Prop 187, we outgrew it. We got reality, and our immigrants got more settled, and we see the benefits. We have a new maturity here. So where it was all our immigrants accelerating out of control, well, are they newcomers? Are they Peter Pan? Are they all just foreign-born? Are they a burden? And the new reality in 2010 is distinctly different. Instead, immigration is leveling off. It's not running out of control. There are many more long settled than there are newcomers. And they are achieving more over time. They're not Peter Pan. And these are the parents of homegrown children. We need these people because we need their kids. And burden? Let's talk about the senior ratio and how we're going to satisfy that. I think it's a new story in Los Angeles where we're arriving at this point ahead of the rest of the country. All the country is destined to go here because the baby boom is everywhere, and immigrants do get older everywhere. This is not unique to California. It's just that we started the cycle sooner, and so we can see the results, the benefits sooner. So it's in a book here that was published by the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State LA called Los Angeles 2010 State of the City. We have a chapter in there called the Immigrants and the New Maturity of Los Angeles. So I thank you for your attention.
So Robert Science, Assistant General Manager for Community Development Department in the City of Los Angeles. So the major implications for me, and I would say in Los Angeles, although I would say we have a new maturity, I do say that much of our institutions haven't matured as quickly as probably some of the political thoughts that have, and also definitely have not matured as quickly as the trends in the immigration. And I'll give you a couple of examples. In South Los Angeles right now, in many of our minds, when we talk about South Los Angeles, we tend to think about South Los Angeles being a traditionally African-American community. And if we get into very specific parts, into Watts and other neighborhoods, we tend to think in that structure. And about 10 years ago when I ran the Youth Opportunity Program, I actually just, I'm not a demographer, but just ran the profile of what does Watts look like. And when we showed that the community itself, and we did a one-page fact sheet, that the community was predominantly Latino. And when we looked at the grade school kids, it was overwhelmingly Latino. The reaction that we got back from many of the community leaders and the institutions within Watts, they wanted to run me out of town. And part of it was that we didn't have that discussion in terms of the changing demographics, because the institutions that ran much of the community had still functioned at it still being an African-American community. And it happens in the Latino community as well, and I use Westlake. After the 92, 93 uprisings there, we did a lot of work with the new immigrants, which was a mix of Mexican and folks from El Salvador. The recent shooting that happened a few months ago, and we did a lot of community outreach and working in that community, and it changed dramatically, where we had Guatemalan folks, immigrants, that didn't speak Spanish. Their dialect was completely separate. And our institutions weren't able to react to it quickly enough. And in terms of the police and many of the city folks, we had to scramble to find folks that could actually interpret for the Guatemalan community and in their particular dialects. So in terms of the changing demographics, they're real, they're happening, they're today. I mean, we could look around the room here. But in terms of our city institutions, we've been slower to adapt and to change. The second point really is on the economic development side, more so about and the seniors, and you hear about the retirements and the home ownership. But what we have to really think about is the workers. And what is our workforce going to look like? And I would remember about 10 years ago when LAPD was doing some serious hiring, they were out recruiting in Iowa. They were out recruiting in the Midwest for police officers for city of LA. And I raised the question, why are we doing that? We have homegrown talent of young kids, men and women who live right across the river that would love these solid middle-class jobs. And some of the responses that I got back were somewhat, stereotypical, but also many of the folks had the belief that they were foreign-born, that, oh, they're not citizens. Or if you got really into it, that they were gang members. I said, no, most of the kids, Latino African-American kids are not gang members, they're good kids, but in their mind. And so we actually did a program with them to go and recruit specifically from these neighborhoods and get our homegrown talent. But part of the story for our young kids is that these children, my children, myself, who grew up here in Los Angeles, need the opportunity to graduate from our institutions. Because the hidden story here is that we need them for to fill the jobs, our middle-class jobs, our lower-skilled jobs, our high-ranking jobs. But if we're not graduating our kids from our institutions, especially LA Unified, who's going to fill those jobs? And the collision course that we have on the economic issue is that folks from around the country are not going to move here, more or less folks from other countries, because one, they can't afford the housing, and the housing market is not going to bottom that far out. And secondly, the ability to move into a community like Los Angeles, it is a different environment, and some folks do survive that. But folks are not going to be looking for these semi-skilled and middle professional jobs to move into Los Angeles. We're going to have to homegrown the workers. But right now, in LA Unified, we are not graduating out of some of our major campuses, Roosevelt, Dorsey, Jordan, 40 to 50% of the young people. And by them not graduating, they're not going to be able to move into these professional jobs or these semi-skilled jobs. And they're definitely not going to move into the higher performing jobs or the higher skilled jobs. So the economic crash that we're facing in Los Angeles is really about the talents. And I think that is kind of the conversation that when you use this data connected to our educational research and on the dropout rates that are happening within the city, it doesn't paint a very good picture. So I do think that this is powerful, powerful information. And I did a presentation in front of the LA School Board, and I was talking about the number of kids that were out of school and out of work. And one of the board members basically said, well, those kids drop out because they go to work. And I said, okay, you're missing a little bit of the point here. I'm talking about the kids who are not working and are not in school. But again, the mythology that if the Latino kids, well, they're good workers. So somehow the institutions didn't have to change to meet them. They didn't belong there. And we have to be able to change our institutions to meet the needs of the populations, the immigrant and the non-immigrant populations. But specifically, we have a true economic need to educate our young people, graduate them from high school at a minimum. Because where are those young people going to go? They were born here, they are citizens, this is their home. where are they going to go? They're not going to be flooding across the borders anywhere. It's definitely not back to other countries. They're going to be here. So I think in terms of connecting to the information that was presented today, that the city of Los Angeles and the school districts, the community colleges, and many of your public institutions need to be able to adapt to the new realities and not to be able to hold on to these old myths that our young people don't deserve the same type of opportunities. So with that, thank you.
No, I didn't just have to take questions. I got no comment other than that's dead on. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for the enlightening update on the demographics and the social consequences. And I just wondered, from the standpoint of the city, obviously it's going to be very difficult to adapt to the changing demographics. And in terms of 40 to 50% of those students not graduating from those high schools, I understand there's some difficulties of people getting their heads around the size of the problem. But is there? Do you anticipate some movement in that direction to channeling those people into the education that will enable them to get the jobs that will allow them to function in society in the direction that it's going in?
Yeah, there's I'd say a growing movement within LA Unified, for example, but for two reasons. One is that they built a heck of a lot of classrooms and seats that they're going to have to fill. And if you look at their declining enrollments over the past few years, and that trend is that they're going to have unused new classrooms. So there's a huge interest in just bringing them back in to fill the ADA that goes back to that. So just from a straight revenue side. But secondarily, there's folks like Monica Garcia and Yoli Flores-Aguilar at the board level. There's a number of administrators that really understand and are part of that second, third generation, as was presented by Professor Myers, that truly understand that when the kids have dropped out of the school, and right now LA Unified is holding a list of about 20,000 folks that are drop out over the last year alone, is that they cannot sustain themselves as a public institution, that there's going to be a growing number of folks that are going to react. The mayor did fire the first, I think, shots across the bow 4 or 5 years ago about talking about the takeover of the LA Unified by the mayor's office. But I do think that you're going to have second, third generation parents who are going to demand that their children have the same educational opportunities and are going to succeed and force them to change the programming and the delivery of service.
There's lots of movement to try to correct the dropout problem, but it's so entrenched. It's a culturally entrenched problem. For the last 30 years, it's been building. It's one of those things that's hard to turn around. I think the senior ratio has the key, and I've been making overtures in different directions to try to apply that. Back in the 1970s, when the baby boomers flooded the job market, we had way too many workers. My sister was reminding me that's when all the people with PhDs were driving cabs. It was the 1970s. There were just too many workers, and we allowed minority youth to drop out of school because we didn't think we needed them. We had too many workers. And that was a culture that's been set up on the majority white side, but it also became a culture that was set up on the minority side where they got used to being neglected. And then you have oppositional cultures that evolve in gangs and other things. Well, we have to pivot on a dime because remember, next year is when Bill Clinton and George W. Bush turn 65. And as they cross that line, we suddenly need young people to be working. We can't have anybody dropping out. When the senior ratio goes sky high, they can't drop out. So I think it's a change of mindset required among all the people in Los Angeles, but also it's a change of mindset required among the parents of these kids and among the kids themselves, because I think oftentimes the kids don't think it's necessarily that valuable to stay in school. It won't pay off. They don't know the basic arithmetic of how many retirements there's going to be and why we really have the opportunity to turn around a whole generation with new opportunities because of the baby boomer retirements. I want to figure out how to get that in front of them, in front of the kids and the parents, but really all the voters as well. It's a sea change happening because of Barack Obama's chart. I'm going to start calling it Obama's chart. Maybe if I call it that, it'll will it to become Obama's chart. So that chart really defines our course over the next 20 years.
Dal, I wonder if you have, to what extent have you factored in senior mobility and plus the fact that by virtue of the financial crisis, many will be postponing their retirement. But I'm particularly interested in how many people in LA who are 65 and older are actually going to stay here. Do you have any sense of those numbers and how they may play out?
Well, our population projections take account of migration patterns that had been established historically. During the 1990s, there was a bit of an accelerated out movement during our bad recession. But older people don't usually move very far. They don't want to leave behind all their friends. I know you hear stories of people who move to Arizona, but people who go to Arizona are different. They really are separatists, and when they get there, they act like separatists. They don't want to live, they don't value community as much as the people who stay home in Cleveland. And I think I'm being serious about that. There's a personality. But in California, we have all these seniors, and the question that I ask my colleagues is, where would you go? Nobody knows where to go. Where would you go where there's lots of room for lots of us? And it's not clear where to go. And so I don't think, Gary, that there's going to be any surprising out movement. I think, if anything, it'll just continue like it has been before, slow, very slow leakage. Now, delayed retirement is much more probable. And we've been trying to track that when my students were looking at it. I was guessing it might be 3 years delay because of the recession, the 401k crash. Well, the 401ks are rebounding. The stock market's coming back up a lot, so there's 3-year delay. And then some other data we saw more recently suggested from the Bureau of Labor Statistics it might be a 5-year delay. So yes, I think there's going to be some delay, but basically the baby boomers are still going to retire. It just might be delayed up to 5 years at most. I think less than 5 years.
Sorry, just to piggyback back off that question, do you think that partial retirement would be at all an issue?
Well, that's where our data system really breaks down. we're not very good at handling partial employment. I think yes, major yes. I think basically older folks like to stay involved. They just don't want to be at the office every day, 9 to 5. And I think there'll be more and more reliance on flexible hours and partial employment, much more so. We don't count that very well in our federal data system. You're either employed or you're not employed. Special surveys you can count underemployment and partial employment. But the major data are kind of yes or no. But yeah, I think that would be a major factor. So I've made a deal with my dean already. I'm going to keep working for another 20 years under the deal that I get 2/3 the pay for half the work. And I'm in. And you know what? With the senior ratio going the way it's going, he's going to take my deal. not this year, but in 10 years, they're going to be begging me to stay. I know it.
In the city of Los Angeles, we had early retirement, so to give an example. And it was really for budgetary purposes. So more than enough folks lined up. I think they had 2,500 or 2,700 open positions that were at ERIP. They had about responsible over 5,000 folks that were eligible and wanted to go. Went out the door. I see them walking the city halls all the time, and all of them have come back on a part-time consultant basis in one fashion or another. Partly because they needed, as someone said, they needed something to do. They were just bored with it, but they were still young enough in terms of, but they, most importantly, they had the knowledge. And because of the hiring patterns that they had within the city during the recession, during 1990 and probably 2003, 2004, we did very, very little hiring. So if you look at our pipeline in the demographic that I'm in, of senior manager at 40 to 50, very, 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 very thin. And they don't have folks to backfill. So they had to hire folks back because they took the knowledge with them, and there was not enough people to leave it with.
Okay. Great.
Well, would you say that the ratio, the senior ratio that's we're pushing out there and suddenly going to release all these jobs, have you compared that to the unemployment that we have in California and whether or not immigrants will need to fill those? Because I think that with all the jobs opening up, with seniors retiring, whether it's in 3 or 5 years, there's so much unemployment that, will we need immigrants to fill those? Or is the unemployment also all immigrants?
Yeah, that's a very great question to ask about what about unemployment today, and who says we need immigrants if we have all this unemployment? And that's how politics is decided, based on gut feelings today and then making policies for the future. Well, I'm just going to say this, Grace, during this. I hope that you are not saying that we are going to have a recession that's going to last for a decade. I hope you're not saying that unemployment is going to stay over 12% in California for the rest of the decade. If you are a doomsday prognosticator. I hope you're not saying that. So in the short run, immigration's really dropped off dramatically because there aren't many jobs. And it probably will stay down, although I just heard today that there's a slight uptick the last 3 months. Very slight uptick, so it stopped dropping. But when our recovery happens, and the big question is when, it's going to be a slow recovery, everybody agrees, and hopefully we'll be back to normal. But I will say that the 1990s is a good experience to look at in California. Our unemployment rate shot up dramatically. It peaked in 1993. We really didn't get back to normal until after 2000. We didn't get back to the same level. And so it can be a long recovery, but I would think, though, that after 3 years, unemployment would have fallen enough, or I'm hoping after 3 years, employment will have fallen enough that we can then incorporate more newcomers. And at about that time is when the baby boomers start to really retire en masse. So the real crunch doesn't come this year. The real crunch comes about 2015 to 2018, somewhere in there is when it starts. And I'm just trying to get people to think ahead, because you need kids in school today to know, okay, I'm an 8th grader today. We don't need you working today, but we're going to need you in 4 years or in 8 years. And so you've got to get yourself ready today. So people just don't think ahead. And so I'm glad you asked that question, because I always am thinking at the future and I'm not talking about the present, and the present undermines my arguments. But only in the present. I think people will grow up, and they're not Peter Pan, and in 8 years' time we have to all be ready, because I'm very darn sure we won't be at high unemployment in 8 years.
Yeah. On the Peter Pan, that it's usual that for the set of the immigrants, that their socioeconomic status improved over time, with the exception of the college, like the BA bachelor's.
Right.
And have you had time to look at for the high school performance? I heard we talk about the high dropout rate, but
It's the same flat line for high school. This is for immigrant adults. Immigrant adults don't go back to high school, and they don't go back to college. Their kids shoot way up to like 85%.
okay.
That's because their kids have a chance. they arrive young enough. But if you arrive at age 25, it's just not going to happen. I still think the miracle is this. How is it possible for Latino immigrants without a high school degree to buy houses? How do they do that? Because it's like after 20 years in America, 51% in California are homeowners. And after 30 years, I think it's 60% are homeowners. How do they do that? Well, they double up their incomes. They engage in a lot of sweat equity. That, you know, they use their manual trades to fix up the houses. They're not the most expensive houses, but they're the houses at the bottom of the housing market. It's a pyramid of houses, and the immigrants coming at the bottom push up the bottom, and that's what jacks up the prices in Beverly Hills. The person in the mansion in Beverly Hills is residing in a house that's dependent on immigrant homeowners down here, pushing up from the bottom. It's a miracle. And if immigrants go away, I think the pyramid collapses. I don't know about that idea. All I know is that when I sell my house, I want to make sure that they can pay me $1 million. And I'm not sure the Mexican immigrants are going to be able to pay me $1 million. But I'm hopeful that their kids, if they go to community college and then transfer to, you know, an easier college like across Westwood, and they get a BA degree there, they can get a good job and earn a good income, and then they can pay me the $1 million that I want, and I'll be glad I paid all those taxes all those years to get them educated, because we have to cultivate our future home buyers.
I really particularly liked your comments on that institutions need to change to the new realities that you guys are pointing out today in the presentation. One of the things that my wife is always advocating for, as a graduate of the Rosier School, is that institutions like LAUSD really need to take a look at their graduation rates and their population. And when they have absenteeism of huge numbers over certain periods like around Christmas time, where immigrants return to Mexico or elsewhere, the institution of LAUSD could adjust school calendars to meet the needs of the population. And I hear the institutional pushback. What other solutions do either of you have to address some of the gaps in things like generation and average age that we're seeing on all these wonderful graphs?
So specifically on the educational side, there's a number of us. This last year, and actually 2 months ago, we brought the city together with LA Unified, with our community-based organizations, which we fund about 200 of them, and we did a major student recovery day. And it was the first time that we actually had LA Unified, the mayor's office, our city institutions, our community-based institutions, and we went door to door. To that list of 20,000 kids, we didn't hit all 20,000, but we hit about 1,500 homes. Went door to door and to talk to the parents and to talk to the families. And part of it was educating the parents of why their kids are not in school. And many of the parents were saying, well, we thought the kids were in school, but when they had 2 or 3 folks show up at their doorstep saying, no, they're not, and this is how we could get them back in. We recovered about 1,100 students in that one day. And it was, again, just an initiative, a one-time effort that we want to be able to sustain on a biannual basis and do that. And it does 2 primary purposes. One, it gets the city working together with LA Unified, but more importantly is the message that we're sending to the families. We had mothers crying, saying thank you. That this is the first time that anyone has come to their door to talk about their kids. The message that we were sending to the families was that their kid is important. Even though they were in Boyle Heights, low income, they're a first generation immigrant, but we said to them, their kid is important. They need to be in school. And that was very, very powerful. It was also very fun to watch them wake up their daughter and have her come down the stairs, and there's folks sitting in their living room, with their school record there, and the expression. And if you don't think that was an important effort and message that we were sending to the community, and it was about the importance of their kid to be educated. And so those are efforts that are budding. But we need to do more, and we need to do more in a systemic way.
I want to ask one question. So, what part of the demographic change and transition is not only the the boomer is living longer, but also the fertility cycle. We haven't quite addressed how that's changing. And the reason I'm asking is because the economists talk about this dependency ratio, which is the percentage of the elderly and the non-working young children as the ratio of the working age population. So globally, for example, India has a big demographic dividend because their dependency ratio is very small, India is very small, which means high prosperity and all that. And the important part of some of the things that you were talking about, is high school dropout and things like that. The beginning was that we were not investing enough in education, right? And that goes to the dependency ratio issue. That not only have to support the elderly, but we need to also train the kids. So I'm wondering if you were to do a kind of analysis like that, whether U.S., California, or states, or county, how would we fare, or is the dependency ratio getting worse, better? How do we, and that has implications for the future of the economy and employment and all of this.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to respond. I have theoretical levels and then strategic levels. First off, I don't like the word dependency. Well, let me start before that. I don't prefer to combine the old age and the youth into a dependency ratio. That's a classic way demographers do it. Because I don't think that youth are really dependent. They are dependent, but it's really an investment you're making in youth. With the older folks, there's no investment. What is it? It's entitlements, we call it. It's payback. You're giving people rewards at the end of their career, but it's not an investment. So it's politically really different money flows. And of course, the old folks vote. And the kids don't. So the kids get the shaft because they're not voting. And the old folks are getting more than they deserve. Our country is a bit unusual that way. But then I don't like the word dependency because my mother was never dependent. She had more money than the rest of us until she died. So that's why I choose senior ratio. So it's a neutral term as opposed to dependency because they resist it. I mean, she never thought she was dependent. But she also thought she was getting more money than it was unconscionable how much money they were giving her. She had all this retirement money, way more than she needed. She was richer before she died than she was at any time in her life. And that's kind of not right. You know, you shouldn't do that. It's too back-end loaded, basically. But you raised the question of birth
kids.
Well, but then a lot of those benefits got cut off when she died, right? Like Medicare and Social Security. We tried to keep it coming, but they found out. So we had to give it back. She had a lot coming. It was that one woman drove around with a corpse in her car for like 2 years, right? In LA here. I don't know if that's what keeping the picture. But on the birth rates, that's an issue about how many children are coming along, and there's not enough kids in most of the world. I just heard today that India is going to be our future source of immigrants. It's not Mexico. Mexico is drying up. The birth rate has plunged globally. And in Europe, in general, you need 2.1 babies per woman to break even. Europe is down to 1.4 babies per woman. All the countries of Europe combined. Korea and Japan are at 1.2 babies per woman. China's at 1.6. They don't have extra people to spare. They have a demographic dividend right now themselves. China's in the sweet spot. They have all these people in their 30s and 40s. And soon they're going to have an aging population with way too few kids coming along. It's going to be a big problem for China because of the one-child policy. Mexico is also dropping. It used to have 6.8 babies per woman. And I'm told by Janet Goldberg that it's fallen. And she showed me a chart where all these other countries have fallen too, but Mexico's fallen more than any other country in the world except for 3. And Mexico is going to soon not have any surplus kids to give us coming across the border. So, that's part of the senior ratio dynamic. It's driven by the lack of kids. And kids are no longer a burden. Kids are a scarce and precious resource. And I really do think that we have this habit based in the 1970s where we neglected kids, got used to neglecting them. And I don't know how you turn it around, but we have to turn them quickly because we're going to need them all hands on deck within 8 years.
But the fragility of the immigrant population is usually higher in the U.S. than the non-immigrant. Now that they're getting all homegrown, because of the fertility decline, or not decline at the homegrown?
Well,
or the other part of the
Mexican
question?
immigrants are having fewer kids now than they used to have when they came here. But it's only about one more kid on average than native born.
Don't worry, I'll speed it up.
All right.
I think we're past our time, so thank you very much.